turn to John 15, verses 9 through 17. Listen to the words of Jesus. He says, "As the Father has loved me, so I have loved you. Now remain in my love. If you keep my commands, you will remain in my love, just as I have kept my Father's commands and remain in his love. I have told you this so that my joy may be in you, and that your joy may be complete. My command is this: love each other as I have loved you. Greater love has no one than this, to lay one's life down for one's friends. You are my friends if you do what I command. I no longer call you servants, because a servant does not know his master's business. Instead, I have called you friends. For everything that I learned from my Father, I have made known to you. You did not choose me, but I chose you, and appointed you so that you might go and bear fruit, fruit that will last, and so that whatever you ask in my name, the Father will give you. This is my command: love each other." This is the word of God for the people of God. Some time ago, there was a middle school English teacher who asked her students to write imaginative descriptions of what a friend was. One of her students wrote this. They said, "A friend is a warm bedroll on a cold and frosty night." Another one said, "A friend is a lively polka in the midst of a dreary musical concert." And another one wrote that a friend is a beautiful orchid in the middle of a desert. One of my favorite authors, Charles Schulz, once had Charlie Brown tell us that a friend is someone who sticks up for you even when you're not around. Friendship is clearly a wonderful thing. But I think if we look at it, it's also a rare thing. In a survey once, it was reported that 60% of men over the age of 30 cannot identify a single person that they would call a close friend. Of the 40% who could list friends, most were made during childhood or school years. That same survey said that most women can identify 5 or 6 other women whom they would call close friends. But if you take a closer look at it, it shows that a lot of these friends were actually just functional relationships. True friendship is not easy to develop. In today's passage, Jesus teaches his disciples the true meaning and value of friendship, and that is love. With true friendship, we must also have love. The Greek words agapeo and agape are found 9 times in this passage. "As my Father has loved me, so I have loved you. Abide in my love. This is my commandment, that you love one another as I have loved you." This love that Jesus is speaking about is not the romantic kind of love that we think of when we hear that word, love. The love that Jesus is speaking of is a characteristic, not the one that sweethearts have, but of what genuinely good friends enjoy. This love, agape love, is an act of the will. The followers of Christ were to love one another as brethren in the same family, children of the same Father, and fellow disciples with each other. To love by keeping and agreeing together, for praying for one another, bearing one another's burdens, forbearing and forgiving one another, admonishing each other, and building up one another in the faith and holiness. Think about what kind of characteristics that you look for in a good friendship. Think of a few things that you would want from a friendship. Anybody want to shout out a couple things they would be looking for in a friend? Yes. The golden rule? Any other characteristics you would look for in a friend? Yes.
Loyalty.
Loyalty. Any others?
Honesty.
Honesty. One of the top things that people find important is that friends care about each other. They care about the other person's welfare. So if you are my friend, I want what is best for you. I would want other people to think well about you. I would want no harm to come to you. Many deep friendships are often forged in the midst of a common suffering. Soldiers returning from the battlefield will always speak angrily of the ugliness of war, and yet, in the same breath, they will talk with warmth about the friends that they made. People who are initially perfect strangers, having passed together through a terrible storm, an earthquake, or some other natural disaster, will suddenly feel themselves to be the closest of friends. They can be found many years later sitting and reminiscing about their shared experience. Another highly favored quality of friends that they share is that they share with each other. They not only share their material things, but also what's inside. They share their deepest thoughts and their feelings. They are there through the good times and the bad times. They laugh together and they cry together. Friendships often require sacrifice of some sort. In some rare cases, even the supreme sacrifice. Jesus said in verse 13, "The greatest love you can have for your friends is to give your life for them." During the Vietnam War, a rural village had been bombarded with mortar shells, and some shells landed on an orphanage run by some missionaries. The missionaries and a few of the children were killed outright. Several of the other children were wounded, including an 8-year-old girl who had multiple injuries and was bleeding profusely. In response to this, a runner was sent to a nearby town, and there a young Navy doctor and a nurse came with their only their medical kits. The young girl was in critical condition and in need of an immediate blood transfusion. Blood typing indicated that neither American had the right blood. However, several of the uninjured children did. The Navy doctor only spoke some pidgin Vietnamese, and the nurse a little bit of high school French. The children spoke no English, but they did speak a little bit of French. So using what language they had and some sign language, they tried to explain to the frightened children that unless they could replace some of the girl's blood, she was going to die. They asked if anyone would be willing to give blood to help. Wide-eyed silence met their request. After several moments of eye searching, a little hand went slowly up, then went back down, and then went back up again. "Oh, thank you," exclaimed the nurse in French. "What is your name?" "Hang," came the reply. Hang was quickly laid on a pallet, his arm swabbed with alcohol, the needle carefully inserted into his vein. After a moment, he shuddered. He covered his face with his free hand. "Is it hurting, Hang?" asked the doctor. Hang shook his head no. but he kept sobbing. His eyes tightly closed, his fist in his mouth to stifle the sobs. Something was very wrong. Just then, a Vietnamese nurse arrived to help. Seeing Hang's distress, she spoke to him in Vietnamese and listened to him and quickly answered him. She stroked his forehead, soothed and reassured him. After a few moments, Hang stopped crying, opened his eyes, and a look of relief spread over his face. Looking up, the Vietnamese nurse explained to the Americans, Hang thought he was dying. He misunderstood you. He thought you asked him to give all of his blood to save the little girl. But why would he be willing to do something like that, the nurse asked. The Vietnamese nurse repeated the question to Hang, who answered simply, because she is my friend. Have you ever had a friend like that? One who is willing to go the distance for you, no matter the cost. I know of at least one. It was on a hill called Calvary, outside the city wall that overlooked the town dump. It was there that your friend and mine died that we might live. What else makes a friendship? According to Jesus in this passage, expectations are involved. He says these two requirements. If you keep my commandments to love one another as I have loved you, and I have appointed you to go and bear fruit. Friends expect each other to keep up their end of the friendship. Now, when Jesus says, you are my friends if you do what I command you, he's not implying that to be his friend is all about following rules. We need to remember what his commandment is. He said that you love one another as I have loved you. Simply put, Jesus is saying, if you want to be my friend, be friend to my other friends. Now this sounds so simple, but as humans, we know it can be so hard sometimes. The apostles knew this also, and we find them reminding the early Christians of this over and over again. One of my favorite passages comes from Galatians 6:2. It says, help carry one another's burdens, and in this way you obey the law of Christ. The law of Christ is simply to love one another. Jesus reminds his disciples that you did not choose me, but I chose you. Reading this reminds me of my childhood. See, during gym class or outside of school, when it was time for teams to be chosen, I was always the one that was picked last. You see, in those days, I didn't really have any great athletic skills, and believe it or not, I did not have the great physique that I have now. During the time of Jesus, if he would have been looking to win the religious game and be popular with the high priests, he would have been like the team captains of my childhood. He would have picked the players that everyone perceived as the best, the most skilled, the popular. He would probably have picked the Pharisees to be on his team. They were the pious people. They were the ones who prayed at least 3 times a day. They knew the Torah and the law frontwards and backwards. They fasted every week to show their devotion. But instead, who did Jesus choose? Who did Jesus want to be around and have close to him? Who did Jesus want to have on his team? He picked fishermen, known to be crude and foul-mouthed, impatient and hot-headed. He chose a tax collector. Everyone knows what those kinds of people are like. He chose a zealot, a fanatical revolutionary, and one who had wanted all the tax collectors killed. It must have been pretty interesting around the dinner table with all the disciples there. And to top it all off, Jesus chose us, known sinners, known to be somewhat less than perfect, known to have all kinds of problems in our own lives. These are the same people that we are called to love. Love one another just as I love you. As Christ has loved us, his friends, freely, despite all of our unworthiness and ungratefulness, so should we love one another. Though there may be many things we disagree with, so should we love one another, just as Christ loves all of his children without distinction. Whether they are poor or rich, weak or strong, lesser or greater believers. And as Christ loves us, not in word only, but in deed and in truth, so we should love one another with a pure heart passionately, and by love serve one another. Let this passage be with you this week. John 13:35. If you have love for one another, then everyone will know that you are my disciples. Amen. Would you please join with me